I've been abusing one tactic to improve my gameplay in Final Fantasy XIV for years now, and I feel like nobody else understands the value of this one tip. The one tactic I'm talking about is the training dummy. Now before you call me a clickbait YouTuber, hear me out. I would argue that most people are underutilizing the target dummy for all of its potential, and I would say it is the biggest factor in my improvement as a player. Proper use of the training dummy can improve your gameplay faster and more effectively than anything else, and that's for one simple reason. It lets you focus on the game and not your gameplay. What do I mean by this? Well, when I watch newer or inexperienced players attempt endgame content, their biggest mistakes always come from their rotation. It is as if they are constantly battling two separate areas of focus, their own gameplay and what the game is throwing at them. The more someone tunnels their rotation, the worse their ability to react to the encounter, dodge AoEs, and overall be a good player becomes. In that same vein, the more someone tunnels on the encounter, dodging AoEs and reacting to the fight and its design, the worse their personal gameplay becomes, and the worse their damage or healing output becomes. What if I told you that by utilizing the training dummy effectively, you can almost completely eliminate this problem of having to focus on two things at once, and can simply focus on one, therefore speeding up your improvement in all aspects of the game? Alright, I'll end the charade and just say it. I am obviously talking about getting comfortable with your damage rotation. I know, healers, you're probably disliking this video, saying things like, what's the point of sitting on a training dummy when my DPS rotation is 2 buttons? But there is still value to this as a healer player. But for my tank and DPS players, when you can stop focusing on this, you can fully focus on all of this. Allow me to tell you a short story. When I first started raiding in World of Warcraft in 2014, I was terrible. I was probably the worst MMO player you have ever seen. When I saw people raiding and looked at their gear, I was amazed, and I decided that I would get good at WoW. My biggest concern was DPS. I wanted to be able to do an endgame boss fight perfectly without having to compromise on my damage output. And that's when I started utilizing the training dummy. I would spend upwards of 6 hours a day sitting in front of a training dummy, doing my DPS rotation without interruption for hours until I made a mistake. And then I would reset and try to set a personal best for how long I could do my DPS rotation without a mistake. Now, I'm not advocating you should go spend hours a day in front of a training dummy, but I am saying it should be among your highest priority when practicing and improving at Final Fantasy. The biggest mistake people make when hitting a training dummy is that they practice their opener and maybe up to the 1 to 2 minute mark and then call it a day. They only learn 60 to 120 seconds of their rotation. How long does a boss fight last? I'm being a bit exaggerative, but I believe it is very important to practice your rotation for extended, uninterrupted periods of time. A 10-minute rotation with no mistakes is what I would consider baseline for being comfortable with your class. In the Balanced Discord under the Resources channel, you can find openers for your class, however it is very hard to find extended rotations and reopeners. This is why practicing at a training dummy is so important. Resources can only take you so far. Eventually you'll have to improvise and improve your rotation on your own. The Balanced Resources should have a guide on every class, and these written guides can help you to understand your rotation on a deeper level, therefore allowing you to optimize your rotation correctly and potency efficiently. Even better, if you have 2 monitors, I would suggest playing a video of a boss fight on one monitor while doing your rotation on a training dummy at the same time, mimicking the fight and building muscle memory without even having to be inside the instance. I have done this numerous times to practice openers that are specific to certain fights or certain phases, or to see if I want to use my AoE skills in the middle of my rotation, how it will impact the alignment of my cooldowns and GCDs later on in a fight. I'm confident in saying that I can play every class in Final Fantasy XIV to a 95 percentile level, and I owe most of that to the training dummy. I practice rotations constantly, I build muscle memory so that I don't have to focus as intensely on my rotation and can instead pay attention to boss encounters, my movement, dodging, and being a consistent player. I implore you, get on the training dummy and truly master your rotation. I have seen exponential growth in my own and other people's play when they start making effective use of practicing on dummies. Your damage rotation and output as a player is just as important as your ability to do a boss fight correctly. A common trap people will fall into is believing that DPS does not matter as much as mechanics, and what you will see is people advocating mechanics over DPS as if it's a law. I've argued for many years that mechanics and DPS are on equal ground. Often the people that advocate for mechanics over DPS have DPS players in their group that are carrying their lack of interest in improving as a player. If you want to slack off and only improve one aspect of your play, then mechanics over DPS is a fine mentality to have. However, if you want to become a top tier player, you need to improve both skills equally, and training dummies are one of the best ways to do so. Let's go over some of the more subtle ways a training dummy can improve your gameplay, starting off with reopeners. A reopener is when a fight has downtime where you cannot attack anything, and your cooldowns will come off cooldown before the boss reappears. For some classes, a reopener can be identical to their original opener, but for other classes, there are differences in a cold opener and a reopener. A prime example of this is the transition from normal Alexander to perfect Alexander in the Epic of Alexander Ultimate. You will enter perfect Alexander with extra resources that you won't have in a cold opener, mainly in the form of your gauge, and you need to know how to effectively perform an opener with those extra resources. Another factor in this specific example is that in this fight there is a mechanic named Ordained Stillness, requiring you to stop performing all actions, and performing a reopener that takes into account the potential for Ordained Stillness is important to beating the enrage of the boss. This is the perfect area where utilizing a training dummy can improve your play drastically, as that reopener impacts the rest of your perfect Alexander rotation. I'm sure if you look for it, you can find numerous clips of groups wiping to perfect Alexander at 1%. These 1% wipes can easily be avoided by optimizing your damage before even getting to that phase. Yes, nerves will play a part in this. However, if you can practice outside the instance, then the muscle memory will kick in even if you are nervous. Another way training dummies can improve your play is by allowing you to understand the loops in your rotation. A rotation loop is a point in your rotation where cooldowns come off cooldown, and when that happens, you perform the exact same sequence of abilities. These are important to learn as you can set up mental checkpoints in your rotation so you know where in your rotation you are. For example, a summoner can set up 2 blocks of their rotation, the Bahamut phase and the Phoenix phase. You can loop these 2 phases of your rotation infinitely, as the sequence of abilities you use in those phases are set in stone. They won't change unless a fight impacts your rotation. Similarly, a ninja can learn 2 different trick attack loops, their 1-minute trick attack and their 2-minute trick attack. Rotation loops will vary in length depending on the class you're playing, but in general you can set up these mental checkpoints using long cooldowns as markers. This can help to optimize phases of fights, as you can change the ability sequences inside those rotation blocks depending on what the fight demands of you. For example, you can say, when my third inner release comes off cooldown, 5 seconds into it the boss requires me to get out of melee range. So, instead of using inner release on cooldown, I will use an extra GCD, be it a combo skill or inner chaos, and hold on to that inner release until I can get the full duration out of it. You can then take that rotation to a training dummy and see how it impacts the rest of your rotation as it breaks the rotation loop. You can optimize that new loop without having to be inside the instance and testing your rotation on the fly, therefore going into that fight with a plan and allowing you to shift your focus from a change in your rotation to the mechanics of the encounter. The third subtle performance increase you can get out of a training dummy is by performing long interrupted rotations. You can learn where your skill speed will break the loops in your rotation, and you can determine what you need to change in your rotation to optimize your damage. Using my samurai gameplay on screen as an example, after my first mid-array outside of Meikyo Shisui, I was going from a Gecko combo directly to a Kasha combo. Were my skill speed faster, this could have been fine. However, it was causing me to get dangerously close to losing my Shifu buff, so mid-training dummy rotation I fixed this and went from a Gecko combo to a Yukikaze combo. If you don't play samurai and what you just heard sounded like gibberish, allow me to condense this example. A damage buff that is supposed to be up 100% of the time was falling off for less than a second, and by changing my rotation slightly, I was able to keep 100% uptime of that buff. This can be heavily applied to Warrior, as getting a full duration Storm's Eye before your inner release can be important to keeping that Storm's Eye buff up 100% of the time. While some of these tips can be taught inside of a raid encounter, when you choose to optimize on a training dummy, you can target specific areas of your rotation that you want to perfect, therefore improving quicker without having to go through an entire raid boss pull to test one change in your rotation. That way, you no longer have to stare at your hotbar and lose focus of the mechanics of the encounter. You can default back to what you practiced and shift your focus from your hotbar to the boss fight. Moving your focus away from your skills and onto the boss fight is extremely important to being a consistent player. If we want to go extreme with this, I can perform the entire Bard rotation with my hotbar disabled. Is this excessive? Yes, of course. I would never suggest playing with your hotbar disabled. However, my point is that my muscle memory on Bard has gotten so good I can play the class without ever needing to look at my skills. Though, you definitely should look at your skills. Please use your hotbar and look at your cooldowns. This is just an example. In closing, I attribute a huge percentage of my improvement as a player to my obsession with the training dummy. Throughout my MMO history, the least changed aspect of my personal play is my rotation. And that's because it is one of the first things I choose to perfect and is one of the most important skills that I maintain. I value DPS equal to mechanical knowledge, and the great part about perfecting your rotation is that it can stand up across multiple boss fights. When you figure it out once, you can apply it to so many different scenarios, that I argue it is among the top priorities for those looking to improve at Final Fantasy XIV. Get on the dummy. Utilize it in ways that you might not think about instantly, such as following a video of a fight you want to do, or by going for uninterrupted rotation sessions to see where the cracks in your rotation are. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe if you want to stay up to date with my content. Peace!